Good morning. From Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida, you're watching live coverage of the launch of the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket and Dragon capsule. This is Falcon launch control at T-minus 1 hour, 14 minutes, and counting. After 4 previous flights to the International Space Station, including 3 official resupply missions for NASA, SpaceX is set to launch its 4th Commercial Resupply Services, or CRS mission to the station, which is designated as CRS-4. Liftoff is targeted for an instantaneous launch window at 2:14 a.m. and 38 seconds Eastern Time. And at the time of launch, the International Space Station will be flying at an altitude of 262 miles over the Arabian Sea, west of the southern tip of India and Sri Lanka. The Dragon spacecraft will be filled with more than 5,000 pounds of supplies and payloads, including critical materials to support the 255 science and research investigations that will occur during ISS Expeditions 41 and 42. Dragon will be carrying 3 powered cargo payloads in its pressurized section and 2 in its unpressurized trunk. The science payloads will enable model organism research using rodents, fruit flies, and plants. A special science payload is the ISS Rapid Scatterometer to monitor ocean surface wind speed and direction. Several new technology demos aboard will enable bone density studies, test how a small satellite moves and positions itself in space using new thruster technology, and use the first 3D printer in space for additive manufacturing. The mission also will be delivering IMAX cameras for filming during 4 station increments and replacement batteries for the spacesuits. This is the 4th of 12 missions under the SpaceX Commercial Resupply Services contract with NASA. Under the contract, SpaceX will deliver a minimum of 20 metric tons of cargo to the station. The weather forecast is not exactly ideal. However, a go was given to fuel the Falcon 9 rocket. The launch team is on station. There's a 30% chance of favorable weather at the time of liftoff. In the area, there is a trough, an upper-level trough that has moved through, brought significant rainfall and thick clouds to the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station area and Kennedy Space Center, and in fact, the entire Space Coast. There are cloud layers and rain currently, and at this time, we're no-go for launch because of the violation of 2 flight rules, one for disturbed weather, the other one for thick clouds. Forecasters from the 45th Weather Squadron have dispatched aircraft in the area to determine if there is a gap between cloud layers that would enable them to perhaps gain more confidence regarding the thick cloud rule. At this time on radar, it appears that the clouds are in violation of the rule. However, the aircraft flying through various altitudes could determine if there are gaps, which would provide some confidence in waiving that rule. We'll keep an eye on things for that. There's an official weather forecast to the launch director at T-minus 1 hour. So that's coming up in about 10 minutes. Today's launch of SpaceX CRS-4 is an important step forward in NASA's stepping stone approach to future space exploration destinations. This and the other resupply missions sustain the International Space Station and its crews throughout its operating life. SpaceX and Orbital Sciences Corporation are making regular cargo deliveries to the space station, and keeping the station active through 2024 enables NASA to continue to be a catalyst for the growth of the American commercial space industry. To ensure the new spacecraft are safe and reliable. The U.S. missions to the International Space Station following certification will allow the station's current crew of 6 to grow, enabling the crew to conduct more research aboard the microgravity laboratory of the International Space Station. The companies will own and operate the crew transportation systems and be able to sell human space transportation services to other customers in addition to NASA, thereby reducing their costs for all customers. By encouraging private companies to handle the launches to low Earth orbit, NASA can then focus on getting the most research and experience out of the station and also focus on building spacecraft and rockets for deep space missions, including flights to Mars. With the station operating until at least 2024, it truly has become the springboard to exploration of deep space and Mars. And it's the key to NASA's dual-path approach, providing the destination for American commercial crew vehicles to fly U.S. astronauts from American soil and a platform to perform research and development technologies that will enable the Space Launch System rocket and the Orion spacecraft to carry us farther into space than ever before. In December, we will see the first flight test of Orion on a United Launch Alliance Delta IV Heavy rocket. NASA is making steady progress on the Orion spacecraft, completing several recent milestones here at Kennedy Space Center in preparation for the capsule's first trip into space in December. Engineers finished building the Orion crew module, attached it and the already completed service module to the adapter that will join Orion to its rocket, and then transported the spacecraft to a new facility for fueling. Finishing the Orion crew module marks the completion of all the major components of the spacecraft. The other two major elements, the inert service module and the launch abort system, were completed in January and December. The crew module was attached to the service module in June to allow for testing before the finishing touches were put on the crew module. The adapter that will connect Orion to the ULA Delta IV Heavy rocket was built by NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. It's being tested for use on the agency's Space Launch System rocket for future deep space missions. NASA, Orion's prime contractor Lockheed Martin, and ULA managers oversaw the move of the spacecraft last week from the Neil Armstrong Operations and Checkout Building to the Payload Hazardous Servicing Facility, where it will be fueled with ammonia and hyperpropellants for its flight test. Once the fueling is complete, the launch abort system will be attached, and at that point, the spacecraft will be complete and ready to stack on the Delta IV Heavy. United Launch Alliance has been busy preparing the 3 boosters of the Delta IV Heavy and a 4th that comprises the upper stage. Each of the engines, the RS-68A engine, produces about 750,000 pounds of thrust. The 3 booster engines will ignite initially, and then the upper stage will deliver the added thrust to send Orion to the desired altitude. Orion is being built to send humans farther than ever before, including to an asteroid and Mars. And although the spacecraft will be uncrewed during its December flight test, the crew module will be used to transport astronauts safely to and from space on future missions. Orion will provide living quarters up to 21 days, while longer missions will incorporate an additional habitat to provide extra space. Many of Orion's critical safety systems will be evaluated during the upcoming December mission, which is designated Exploration Flight Test 1. The spacecraft will be traveling about 3,600 miles out into space. And meanwhile, NASA is pressing ahead with the development of the Space Launch System rocket and Orion, preparing for an uncrewed mission of the two together in 2018. So as we prepare for the launch of the Falcon 9 and Dragon this morning, we look ahead to the future, a bright future for NASA and its commercial partners. At T-minus 1 hour, 2 minutes, 10 seconds and counting, this is Falcon Launch Control. This is Falcon Launch Control at T-minus 1 hour, 40 seconds and counting. We're standing by for a weather update from 45th Space Wing weather forecaster Mike McAleenan to the SpaceX Launch Control Team, and that weather briefing should be coming up momentarily.
This is the LWO with the L-minus 1 hour range weather briefing. On your video display, you should see an enhanced satellite picture showing extensive cloudiness over the Florida Peninsula and only some clearing up to the Florida Panhandle. That is a long wave trough that's digging into the Gulf of Mexico, causing a lot of widespread cloudiness and thick clouds and rain showers over the eastern half of the peninsula. Expect that to also steepen as the day progresses and actually generate a surface low off to our east in north of the Bahamas in the Atlantic. That's going to cause the cloudiness to remain along the eastern side of the peninsula. Zooming in a little closer, you can see that that extensive cloud cover exists all the way from Jacksonville through Miami. We are seeing some slight breaks, but nothing that is not a threat. We are seeing thick clouds through the whole central part of the peninsula at this time. Looking at the radar, you can see that 0 dBz level, we have had the most breaks overhead at this time with some more extensive cloud cover and thicker clouds moving in from the south. That's right now it's about 20 miles and moving about 16 knots. So this thicker cloud cover looks like it's going to be moving in towards T0 versus having the breaks move in. So we're not looking too good. Right now we are no-go on two rules, disturbed weather rule and the thick cloud rule. And again, those thicker areas are moving in, so it does not look like these are going to clear in time for T0. We have again, looking at the forecast for the remainder of the window, up the probability to a 90% chance that these clouds will continue with those thick clouds now moving in a little bit sharper, and it does not look like they're going to clear. Winds will stay out of the northeast at about 12, peak 17, but it looks like that we will stay no-go for these criteria through the remainder of the window. In the event of a 24-hour delay, that low-pressure system that develops on the surface off to the east should start moving towards the north and east, and as it does that, some of the clouds and moisture will draw away from the peninsula with that low-pressure system. Winds will switch around out of the north and northwest, and although we're still looking for the same rules of primary concern, a much better chance of finding those breaks with much less cloud cover, so only 40% chance of violation, again, with the thick cloud rule and the flight through precipitation rule. And that's all I have unless there's any questions. This concludes the briefing.
This is Falcon Launch Control at T-minus 56 minutes, 30 seconds and counting. And as you heard from Mike McAleenan, the 45th Weather Squadron forecaster for this morning's launch, things are not looking overly encouraging. He has upped his percentage of the violation of weather constraints to 90%, with thick clouds and flight through precipitation concerns for liftoff as well as disturbed weather. We'll keep an eye on the weather as well as the status of the countdown. Several months ago, both the Falcon 9 rocket stages were transported to SpaceX's rocket development facility in McGregor, Texas for testing, and then they were trucked individually here to SpaceX's hangar at Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, where the stages were integrated and the Dragon spacecraft was loaded on with its cargo. The final major pre-flight test was a static fire test when Falcon 9's 9 first-stage engines were ignited for a few seconds, with the vehicle obviously held in place securely to the pad, and that was successfully performed Wednesday night, early Thursday morning at about midnight. Key NASA and SpaceX personnel have been collaborating on the design of the rendezvous profile for CRS-4, including both the timing and the path of Dragon's approach to the station. And they've worked together to identify, process, and pack the NASA and international partner cargo that is to be delivered to and from the station. The final late load occurred during the afternoon on Friday. A formal stage operations readiness review was conducted involving representatives from SpaceX and all 5 of the International Space Station's partners to ensure that the launch vehicle, the spacecraft, the cargo, the space station itself, and the launch and operations teams were ready for the mission. Having passed that milestone, Falcon 9 and Dragon have been powered up. The systems are activated, the computers are turned on. Fueling process was begun earlier this morning with RP-1 propellant, the rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen fed into both stages of the Falcon 9 rocket. Gaseous oxygen is being vented from the tanks. That's the clouds that you see surrounding the rocket. We're working no technical issues at this time. However, weather is not cooperating, and once again, we currently are 10% go, 90% probability of violating weather constraints for the liftoff, which is scheduled for 2:14 and 38 seconds a.m. Eastern Time. At T-minus 53 minutes, 15 seconds and counting, this is Falcon Launch Control. This is Falcon Launch Control at T-minus 45 minutes, 47 seconds and counting. Once again, we're not working any major technical issues this morning. Weather is not being a friend for the Falcon and Dragon. The 45th Weather Squadron forecast has been altered to show a 90% chance of violation, or the probability of violation today. You can see on the radar a massive band of showers and clouds over the Space Coast. We are no-go for the two weather criteria, disturbed weather and the thick cloud rule at this time. There's a large pattern of rain and winds and clouds over the entire state of Florida that just continues to pour moisture over the launch complex at the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. There's also the possibility of flight-through precipitation that would be violated with rainfall in the area at this time. The disturbed weather flight rule talks about not launching if there is disturbed weather within 5 nautical miles. The disturbed weather clouds can extend into freezing temperatures and contain moderate or greater precipitation, and that would be problematic. The thick clouds, the rule states that you cannot launch through a cloud layer greater than 4,500 feet thick that extends into freezing temperatures. Aircraft had been dispatched in the area to try to get a sense for whether there were any breaks in the cloud decks. But in fact, rather than the earlier prediction that perhaps the cloud layers would lessen as we moved forward launch time, they actually appear to be thickening. There are circular bands of clouds that are moving into the launch area from the south. And 45th Weather Squadron forecaster Mike McAleenan is now predicting that the thickest of those will probably be over the area at the predicted time of launch at 2:14 a.m. So the launch control team will continue to evaluate the situation and make a decision as we approach the T0 time. This is views of the Launch Control Center, the SpaceX Launch Control Center here at Cape Canaveral, Florida. There's a team of controllers also standing by in Hawthorne, California at the SpaceX headquarters, monitoring the launch this morning, or preparations for launch. They also will be obviously engaged in following the flight, controlling the Dragon capsule once the mission does lift off. And in Houston, Texas, Mission Control Center at the Johnson Space Center works around the clock, controlling the International Space Station, interfacing with the crew, monitoring systems, and they are also on console this morning, ready for the liftoff of the CRS-4 flight. They will be there for today or whenever we do launch the mission. So we're standing by for further words on the weather. We're at T-minus 41 minutes, 30 seconds and counting. This is Falcon Launch Control. This is Falcon Launch Control at T-minus 31 minutes, 24 seconds and counting. Here at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, 45th Weather Squadron forecaster Mike McAleenan has been briefing the Falcon
This is Launch
Control
Director
team.
on...
And as you hear, we have scrubbed the launch attempt for this morning because weather was just not going to cooperate. The situation was continuing to degrade. Thicker clouds continued to move into the area. There was an increased chance of moisture, and rather than continue through the countdown any further, the launch director and team have made the determination to scrub today's launch attempt. And as you also heard, there is a launch attempt tomorrow at, tomorrow the launch attempt would be at 1:52 a.m. and 4 seconds Eastern Time. And SpaceX and NASA's International Space Station Program Office have been negotiating a possible third launch attempt on the 23rd. We will be finding the time of the potential launch attempt on the 23rd, but at least for now, we're going to come back and try again tomorrow. NASA television coverage will begin at 12:45 a.m. Sunday for the next launch attempt. Once again, liftoff is targeted for an instantaneous launch window at 1:52 a.m. and 4 seconds Eastern Time. Weather, while predicted to be more favorable, is still going to be problematic. The current forecast calls for a 40% chance of acceptable liftoff weather for tomorrow's attempt. And for now, this will conclude our launch coverage of the launch of Falcon 9 and Dragon. You can follow the SpaceX CRS-4 mission activities on Twitter using @NASA and the @SpaceX, and by also using hashtag #ISS. On the web, www.nasa.gov/SpaceX. Once again, we have scrubbed today's launch opportunity because of inclement weather and the very unlikely probability that weather in the area will clear up before 2.5 to 3 hours from now. So once again, we will be back tomorrow at 12:45 a.m. Sunday for our launch attempt at 1:52 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. This is Falcon Launch Control.